Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, AIDS. 30 years ago, we didn't know about it, but it was there. Today we're speaking with the Venerable Turney of San Francisco's Grace Cathedral about a new exhibit that commemorates that sad anniversary. Anthony, welcome.
Well, it's very good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
30 years.
I know, amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you have been, well, involved in the fight against AIDS for a long time. Tell everyone about your history with the epidemic.
Well, like everyone, I first learned about it from reading the newspapers and about what was then called gay cancer and these awful illnesses that gay men were getting. But it wasn't until 1984 that someone that I knew closely came down with it and, of course, died shortly thereafter. But that was just the beginning then of a long sequence of losing good friends and colleagues, co-workers.
Right. You never thought that part of your professional career would be dealing with the disease, did you?
No, I didn't. I didn't. Although I became, I suppose one would say, personally involved very soon, because I think many gay men realized that we had to step up and volunteer to do all kinds of things that just weren't available then in terms of care and compassion. So I volunteered for Shanti, as a lot of men did, and visiting nurses was another organization that I volunteered for. And then, of course, in some years later, became very much involved professionally with the NAMES project.
As their executive director,
yes.
I remember I was with you for 2 marches on Washington.
Yes.
And then at what point did you shed the kind of a starched collar for a really starched collar? Because that's also involved with AIDS as well. Tell us that story, if you would.
Well, I think that the call to ministry, as it's known, can come from any direction and any reason. And mine, I've come to understand over the years, certainly was the result, I think, of being involved in this epidemic and very personally losing my partner of some 11 years to it. And out of that kind of crucible of loss came a call to ministry. And that really is how it all happened.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever think sometimes, gosh, I just want to put down this crucible, it's just too much?
Well,
I mean, you have to laugh because, I mean, for 30 years we've all done a lot of crying.
We have done a lot of crying. But I think that now we can see hope on the horizon. I don't know how long it's going to take for a vaccine, for instance, to finally be approved, but we've come a long way. And of course it was incredible to be around in 1996 when protease inhibitors came into being, and it seemed almost overnight, the dying, if it didn't stop, it's certainly dramatically reduced.
Yeah, I mean, there was quite a difference between that day, I forget the year, but the Bay Area Reporter, Northern California's largest LGBT paper, had 2 full pages of obituaries. Yes. Were like 30 or 40 mainly gay men who had died.
Yes.
And it went from that to a day just a few years ago where for the first time in a good many years, no AIDS deaths in the paper.
Yes,
so we're in a different era.
We are.
Well, one of the things that this era has allowed us to do is comment on the epidemic. I mean, back in 1981, 82, 83, certainly in the dark days of the mid-90s, no one was thinking about art pieces about AIDS. But now we are actually using art to comment on the epidemic.
Well, I think actually art has been a part of our reaction to the epidemic in many ways. There's a wonderful organization here in San Francisco called Visual Aid, which I believe you were one of the founding board members of, which is a direct result of the epidemic and an effort to ensure that artists who were living with the disease and perhaps didn't have much money were able to buy materials and paint and so on. And of course, out of that, I think many artists began to kind of, as artists do, show us aspects and insights into the epidemic that really stretched our imagination. And that's what this installation at the Cathedral is going to do, I think.
Yeah, nice segue, I was going to say, because I've seen images of this piece, which is by a local artist, Daniel Goldstein, called The Invisible Man.
Yes.
tell us, what are we going to see? And I understand it's actually being installed this week and then goes through World AIDS Day, actually passed into December.
It's going to be up until December 4th.
Mm-hmm.
Daniel has become quite well known for his mobile sculptures. And I guess I was at the Visual Aid Gallery and saw this sculpture, which is called The Invisible Man. It's hard to describe. It's very dramatic, and I think actually going to be quite...
and kind of edgy.
Edgy. Very good word. It's constructed of almost 900 hypodermic syringes. Each syringe is tipped with a little red bead. It looks almost like a drop of blood. Mm-hmm. And these syringes are suspended from wires in a 360-degree pattern. So they're all pointing inwards into the center of a circle. Mm-hmm. But Daniel has so cleverly arranged them so that when you step away from this sculpture, which is about 7 feet high, you begin to discern the shape of a human being in the center of this sculpture. Mm-hmm. And he calls that shape the presence of absence. Mm. And what he means by that, I think, although I hesitate to interpret an artist, but I think what he's getting at there is it's symbolic of the absence of all those men, all those friends, all those colleagues that we've lost, and that it's left a vacuum.
Well, and a very active present in the lives of those left behind.
Right, right.
I mean, you go into Grace Cathedral, which I believe is the only Christian church in the country, maybe the world, that has an interfaith AIDS chapel with an altarpiece by Keith Haring.
Yes.
I mean, Grace Cathedral is a unique church, correct?
I like to think so.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got a unique position. I mean, I know your professional and personal life have been involved in Grace Cathedral for a good many years, but you have a new position there, which I think is a really nifty title, Deacon for the Arts.
Yes, how about that?
Yeah. I mean, how are you creating this position? Because it's a new position, right?
Well, it's very simply, I retired from full-time ministry over a year ago, and when our new dean, Jane Shaw, came on, she and I chatted about how I might continue in some way to be of service to the cathedral, and out of that came the idea of having someone really focus on increasing the way in which the arts are integrated into the life of the cathedral. Mm-hmm. And she suggested that I might like to do that. I hasten to say it's a volunteer position.
It's a slippery slope, the
right.
Anglican Church, yeah.
But this installation of Daniel Goldstein's piece is the first project that I will have worked on.
Right. Now, cathedrals have a historic place in the realm of the arts. I mean, because we think of cathedrals as these very quote unquote high church places, but the original concept of a cathedral was kind of part market, part church, part art bazaar, correct?
Absolutely. Medieval cathedrals were really community centers as well as religious centers. So there'd be straw all over the floor, and they were a place of the community coming together for all kinds of reasons. But of course, in their architecture, particularly the Gothic style of architecture, with its soaring columns and this sense of being awestruck as you enter the building, the light, the play of light, the symbolism of light in a religious context as it plays through the stained glass, the sculptures, and then of course what happens in a cathedral. We're graced, no pun intended, but
nice one, yeah.
We're graced up at Grace Cathedral with having the extraordinary choir of men and boys who do, the music standards at the cathedral are really quite amazing.
Right. So you talk about this piece being transformed into something that you can actually perceive a human figure in from a distance.
Right.
The cathedral's got to be one of the only places large enough to achieve that effect. I mean, it's what, the 8th largest cathedral in the United States?
It is the 3rd largest Episcopal cathedral in the United States. I'm not sure where it is, in line of all cathedrals, but it's certainly one of the largest, next only to Washington National Cathedral and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York. Mm-hmm. So yes, this sculpture is of a scale that really works inside the cathedral.
Right. Now, to go back to talking about Grace Cathedral as a unique place, I mean, it's no secret, maybe to our viewers it'll be news, but I mean, not only do you have a new dean who's a woman, which is quite unusual, but she's an open lesbian. I mean, Grace Cathedral has got to be unique in the church in general, as far as its ministry to the LGBT community. Do you think that's a safe statement?
I think it's a fair statement. I really do. And I like to think that our denomination, the Episcopal Church, is one of the more welcoming denominations. We've had a struggle with that, there's no question, as all churches have had. I think we've come a long, long way. We still have a ways to go, but I'm very proud of what the church, our church has done. And not only done in the sense of being welcoming, but I think really, how should we say, walking the walk.
Yeah, well, walking the walk has sometimes led to some people throwing some bricks along the walk. I mean, the African church doesn't seem to be terribly happy. Do you ever get anything akin to hate mail from other Episcopal churches?
Oh, no, I don't think we get hate mail anymore.
Anymore?
Anymore. Well, whatever that terrible man is who comes from...
Fred Phelps.
Fred Phelps. I mean, he descended on us one day after actually an AIDS service some years back. The way we dealt with that was he was on the other side, he and his supporters were on the other side of the street from the cathedral and were chanting their usual hateful messages. And so we just turned on the carillon and drowned them out with bells. It was rather wonderful.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, his organization, I rarely say this word, but I mean, that's the name of the organization. His group is called GodHatesFags.com.
Right.
You know, I don't...
Which, of course, is an absolute lie. I don't know how else to put it. Of course, that's silly.
Yeah. In our last few minutes, talk a little bit about how you feel the epidemic has changed in the last 30 years, on a personal level or professionally. I mean, I know for me now, being 50, I go through the Castro, and 25 years ago, I was in my 20s, and boy, AIDS was a daily part of my life. You saw it, you experienced it, you worried about it, and now I see and hear of young men in their 20s pretending like it's something no worse than a toothache.
Yeah, it reminds me of what it was like, you know, in the 70s before AIDS, when men got all kind of STDs and just went and got a shot for them, and everything was fine. My fear, and I think the fear of a lot of people, is that we not get into a place of a kind of complacency, where now the feeling is, well, if I get infected, then they have the medications, I can live with it.
Which rip up your liver.
I mean, the medications do terrible things. And so I think we have to be constantly vigilant and educating about what this disease really means, particularly, I think, among young gay men who, like you and I were when we were their age. I think, you know, you feel you're invincible.
You're going to live forever.
And you're going to live forever. So I think we have to be very careful to do everything we can to ensure that there isn't this sense of complacency.
Right. Now, this art installation by Daniel Goldstein is up at Grace Cathedral from November 16th through December 4th.
Right.
But on World AIDS Day, which I believe is a Wednesday?
It's Thursday.
Thursday, December 1st, there's a special World AIDS Day commemoration. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, all the services, the regular services in the course of the day at the cathedral will be integrated into World AIDS Day in one way or another. So the morning services will take place in the AIDS Chapel that you mentioned earlier with its wonderful Keith Haring sculpture. The noon service will take place in front of Daniel Goldstein's sculpture. So it's going to be a very dramatic service. And the last I heard, our bishop will be there. And then in the evening, one of the most sublime services you can hear in the church will take place at 5:15.
Vespers?
No, we call it Evensong.
Evensong.
And the choir of men and boys will be singing. And anybody who comes can come up and sit in what we call the Great Choir. It is the most wonderful service. I love it. It's my favorite service of all the Anglican services.
Well, thank you so much. We'll certainly be there for World AIDS Day.
Thank you very much, David.
We've been speaking with the Venerable Anthony Turney about the sculpture, Invisible Man, coming to Grace Cathedral. Next up, art of a somewhat lighter vein, Global Winter Wonderland. We'll be speaking with its creator, Lulu Wang. We'll be right back.